Am I my homework? Food. Food or homework?
Yeah, I used to do stuff. Like when I
Thank you.
About 2 minutes. Make sure you know who's talking in each group, who's starting out, so that you get it out of the way right away, and then make sure you know who's talking first, and then anyone else is talking right when I call it. Make sure you know who's talking first, just so that when I call your team, it doesn't have that weird lingering, middle silence.
Everyone's looking around.
And anyone can speak. I'm just saying, know who's going to start it off.
Don't just sit today, tomorrow's right.
First step is always the hardest. 1 minute. No, it's not due tomorrow. They're always due the week after. So you get a week. I know you guys, some of you might not have your textbooks yet or whatever, but they'll do. I'll send that. 30 seconds.
Steal a bunch of celebrities.
All right, just a quick review before I do. Oh, hello, Sam. Quick review before I let you guys do the discussion, starting you off number 1 and number 2. 2 questions here, so try and touch on these a little bit, but I asked you specifically to focus on question 2. Even if you don't fully believe that this one particular idea is the most important, try to at least, defend it to a certain extent so that we can have some conversation. Number 1, after defining the various philosophy terms, how do you see each interacting with the other? How would you construct the family of these ideas? How do they work together? And number 2, what idea is the most vital in understanding the rest of the book? Or I could say maybe perhaps TOK itself, how would be the best idea to really filter the rest through? Is there an idea that seems to be standing out as the most important? I'm going to go to this team first. It has the most people, so we might generate the most conversation. Go ahead and get started.
Wait, so you want to answer number
Anything you want to talk about.
Okay, so I'll talk about how do we see them interacting with each other? We kind of came to the conclusion that epistemology, reason, ethics, and the other one, religion, all fall under philosophy. So it's kind of like that's your head, and then these are your children.
Okay, so if you were to construct sort of a profile, it would look like there'd be a word at the top, philosophy, and then from that, almost like a sort of a Linnaean system of speciation, it would come down into these various types, or these types of knowing that are all part of the central
And then even
form.
if you wanted, you could draw interconnecting lines between like the children and
Okay.
as to how they're related, like which one's related to which.
Okay, and would you do you have like off the top of your head what you would think, for instance, is an example of which ones would connect the best? Like, what are 2 things? If I were to do religion, what connects best to religion?
So we were talking about with religion, you couldn't actually have a sense of religion without having a sense of moral. So without understanding ethics, you would not be able to understand religion. How, for reason and logic, if you had logic, how would you know what you exactly know? How would you know if everything that you mention is true? You have to have epistemology to understand logic first.
Oh, I see. So logic seems to be perhaps a tool, and epistemology is almost the way those tools are sorted, or something along those lines. Those are interesting. And then, of course, religion and ethics seems to be a nice pairing. It's like a good dinner wine or something. It's like meant to be paired together, because religion seems so often interested in how you live your life. dictates and laws and that sort of thing, and just punishments perhaps, or unjust punishments if you're a critique of religion. So those are all very good things. So now, are all these on the same level under philosophy? Would you consider them to be fairly equal, even though there's pairings, or they're all under this umbrella of philosophy, or could you perhaps say that one is more important than the rest? Yes?
I would have to say that epistemology and reason might have to be the biggest ones, because without epistemology, that's the theory of knowledge. I mean,
It really is, they're synonymous terms, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
Epistemology is like the fancy way of saying what we've talked about as deemed as theory of knowledge, yeah, so.
yeah. And
Okay.
with reason, without reason, you wouldn't be able to do anything. You wouldn't be able to tie your own shoes. You wouldn't be able to do math.
We would collapse like a
Yeah.
bunch of broccoli if you did. Anyone knows about the Frankenstein reference?
Yes, doing this.
We would collapse like a bunch of broccoli, right? We didn't have epistemology, we couldn't tie our shoes even. or reason, I should say. You don't have reason.
People can figure out what a bunch of broccoli collapse like.
Yeah, how does it? Okay, so does someone want to maybe to do a sort of a disagreement or a rebuttal to that idea of reason? Is there anyone else that has a different idea of the most important? We'll just kind of throw it out there. Kabir, go ahead.
Yeah, we're not done.
Oh, continue that, please. Forget my caveat. Continue, please. Kabir. More important, of course.
Excuse me.
How selfish of me.
Okay, so number 2, which is what I did, to kind of spoil it, but what we were really discussing was that we don't believe, well, at least when I presented to the group, I was saying that I don't really believe that the ideas presented, like the philosophy, religion, ethics, the other ones, really are the most vital in understanding the rest of the
Oh, you didn't think he even?
No, I
even
thought
touched
that
it, okay.
what the author was trying to get across was to understand that there are these different areas of philosophy or these different areas of knowing, and that by understanding and accepting that there are these different views as to how to see or how to know, that that's the most important thing before you start actually asking questions about what do we know and how do we know.
Right. So the purpose, in your opinion, of the novel or the book is merely as a literacy, like a roadmap. Before you even begin to assess or synthesize these things or evaluate them as what's more important, you got to know what they are. Is that what you're saying? So the purpose of it wasn't to argue for one of these particular areas, and I would agree with you. I don't think it was meant to argue, and that was why the question here wasn't in your paper to say that. This question is now to get you to start evaluating them actually. So very good. So to go back to the original thing, are we in agreement, complete agreement, that reason is the most important of things? Like you can't do anything else before you have reason? Or I should say the most important thing. Okay. Everyone else?
Well, I mean,
I don't want to push back myself.
you could argue that reason was based off of, like, it depends how you define what reason is.
Okay.
Like, and where did we get reason from? So you could say that you got reason from religion because reason was brought to you by God. That sounds like a commercial. Brought to you by God.
Reason brought to you by God.
Great commercial one.
That's funny. No, but your point is well taken. If you have a high view of religion or some type of religious knowing, which we will talk about more second semester, and we'll have it under the subheading of indigenous knowing, so other types of systems that are within a cultural context. But to your point, if epistemology is founded on a divine authority or something non-human, something supernatural, that will definitely color your view of what reason and the role of reason in your everyday life and in your worldview. Another thing that I was going to push back on, Esme, you did that before I talked.
I think you probably already skipped it, but how can you tell if your reason is justified? Like with epistemology, I think that's the most important one because your reason is going to be different from somebody else's reason. And
So when I do reason, I guess, and then the question is, what is reason? Which of course we will get into next week. We will start that formal conversation about reason and formal and informal logic. But you're absolutely right. If epistemology is the most important, that because of the fact that it allows us to categorize and put things in a correct order, reason would take a secondary role to that concept of categorization. So it'd be one of many categories in which we know things. And of course I'm not saying that you're objectively right, I'm just describing what you said. Emma?
And I agree with Esme in a way, but I think they're all kind of equal because different words have completely different meanings in different areas of philosophy. Like I did, what is good?
Right.
And good is different in every single different subject of philosophy. Like good to someone who believes in God would be doing what God said, and good to someone who believes in like ethics and believes to behave ethically would be good in the eyes of society.
Right.
So it's like nothing really has the meaning of anything.
Yeah.
They're all just separate.
And that idea of just what the language, which is an area of knowing that we'll talk about, or I should say it's a way of knowing, this idea of using symbols, and in art we call it like sort of a simulacra code, a systemized code of language, that definitely will underpin and change a lot of, how can I even begin to do reason if I don't have some type of codification in my brain? What does thoughts look like if it's not through words? Do you think in images, or do you think in words? How many of you think in images, where you just sort of see flashes of images most of the time? Not all of it. How many of you guys see words scrolling, or other something else like that, or hear yourself talking? Do you guys hear yourself talking more often than? So our internal mind, or whatever that is, our brain or whatever, seems to codify the things that we do. And is that the most important? Does that start before I can even learn to categorize? I need the word to put in the right place. And then that word will change depending on what place it's in. That word good can mean different things. What does good look like in medicine if someone is a good person? What's another synonym for that in medicine? Healthy, right? So healthy. And so a lot of people will, some people will criticize it as being equivocation, which means you falsely synonymize, or you falsely equal these things. That good, meaning the most ethically just, if you're thinking of ethics, means well-being, the most healthy life possible. But that doesn't necessarily equate if you're thinking about it from an ethical standpoint. For instance, I can be very healthy and be a very terrible person, correct? Or I can be a very terrible person but perhaps maximize the health of people around me, and I'm good, but I could be a terrible person. Could I or couldn't I? So those are questions that we'll ask, obviously, with ethics. What is the origins of ethics? How do we do ethical reasoning? And what ultimately is the outcome or purpose? Anyone think ethics is the most important of those things, or could defend that potential? What is reason without ethics? What is reason without actually having a standard by which we conduct ourselves? What is science without ethics? I mean, that would be an interesting thing there. If you can't even... Huh? A bomb, thank you, yes. Yeah, something really horrible. So that's what I'm trying to get us to think about what is the most important of these understandings. Because it seems like we can have our chess pieces move in all sorts of directions. Anyone else want to discuss things from what you did that was different than what this first group did? I gave you guys all time to do this second question. Does anyone have something different about how they see the things interacting? Emma, do you guys have something similar or different?
Maybe we can just talk about logic.
Go ahead.
Well, we were just like, I don't know if it relates more to number 1 or number 2, but like how reason is just like the central idea out of all of them, I guess. But I think we already like touched on most of it.
Sure.
It's like you can't really do anything without logic. I mean, every day, like every single thing you do is like it involves logic to
Right.
do everything.
And what's funny is, you guys know what category logic is in if you were to take it in college? Like formal logic courses. Who do you think most likely takes formal logic courses, besides philosophy majors? But it's actually in a discipline.
Computer science.
Yeah, like a computer science and mathematics. So mathematics, actually, most of formal logic is is derivatives of algebra. Like it has A's and B's and these weird symbols and everything, just kind of sets up like an equation. And reason itself, just like all natural world, seems to be derived from these mathematical principles. All right, very good. Anything else? Any guys have something different than this that you want? No worries. We touched on quite a bit of this. Very good. Well, these are really good intro thoughts. You guys have some very sophisticated, I think, ideas to start out with, and I think some good questions as well. I heard several questions as I was talking to each group. You're probably not over in here. You guys had things about purpose of law. You had things about free will, and then what was your question again? The what? Yeah, the idea of history and how we can tell the intentionality of people in the past, in particular about the Constitution and U.S. law. So, those, and each of the questions that I heard you guys speak on were similar to those about our ability to see the world around us, to believe the world around us, and to justify it. As Esme used the correct Platonic term that we're going to do today. So let's go into transition right now so that we can kind of get into those terms, because Esme kind of mentioned that justified. Am I justified in these types of things? That's a Platonic term that we're going to use today. But first, though, the idea of questions. Remember, we did that yesterday. We started with questions and what kinds of questions there are. I had several statements that had different use of the word question in it, from the most narrow to the most broad in terms of how we use the word question. And as this idea of good and bad questions, you might have heard teachers sort of cliche throw out, there's no such thing as a bad question. You can all just tell me any stupid thing you want.
Yeah.
And I'll just be like, oh, of course, Timmy. I know you're kind of, it's a great question. It gets hard as a teacher, I can tell you, being patient with that kind of thing when you said it 3 or 4 times. Wait, what page are we on? It's on the board, and I've said it 1 billion times. So, yes, there are such a thing as bad questions, perhaps. Well, at least, I should say, not using these ethical terms, maybe something different. Is there such a thing as a bad question? I would say that it depends, right? Obviously, everything depends. The type and specificity, so you're taking notes for the week, that's kind of what you're transitioning into now. The idea of type and specificity. So the type of question, you want to have the right question for the right scope of whatever it is you're pursuing. Your hypothesis or your research question needs to fit what your end result is trying to be. So the question can be bad, quote unquote, if it is not the correct type. Again, if it's not open-ended enough, or if it is of wrong origins. If you're trying to study, I don't know, the evolutionary traits of an animal and your research question has more to do with their behavior or some other type of thing, it might be the wrong type of question. The same with the specificity, so how narrow or how wide the question is. And this will go to any type of research that you actually do. Semester 2 will be more focused on research as a philosophy in and of itself. So how do you research? How do you research ethically? How do you research reasonably? How do you filter your research? But you will need to start learning how to create questions and to create appropriate questions so that you can begin to interact with the world around you, not only in your other disciplines, but also, of course, in this course, we will be using problems of knowledge quite often. At least once a week, you'll be constructing the problem knowledge, and we'll be practicing and honing and modifying that. So we're going to get into that. Don't worry. We're going to get you working in that, and we'll be fixing and molding them. But these questions and their type and specificity are vital to discovering areas of knowing. If you want to know things, you got to know how to ask the right question of it. You got to tease it out. A question too broad often leaves knowers scattered, meaning you're kind of going off in any one direction and aren't able to bring it back. I know I said the word one direction, isn't that Emma, turn. Yeah.
You did it too.
Oh, that's true. Sorry. That's correct. One direction. Got to stay on one direction. A question, however, too narrow will leave the knower locked into one area of knowing, and you won't be able to pull it yourself out. You'll only be able to see it through the microcosm of a single place. And this is typically, well, I should ask you this in a broad way. What do you think is when you see problems arise in conversation or debate, like those concepts over here, they talked about global warming. Kaylin was talking about how you guys had an environmental science. You guys all in the same classes, by the way, most of the time, or maybe not, maybe. But there was a conversation or debate on global warming. Do you think these questions tend to be too broad, like everyone just kind of throws out whatever they want to talk about, or do they seem like they're too narrow, where they're only focusing on one area and not stepping back and thinking about other areas? That might be an interesting question in and of itself, is which one do you see most often? Do you see people doing too broad or too narrow? Emma?
I think narrow, because it kind of locks the person they're asking, like in debate form at least, locks the person they're asking into a corner where they can't answer anything, because they know that specific question doesn't have a good answer for the other person.
And that could be that one, and it could be also that one person is an expert in that one area, so it's better to keep them down that rabbit hole or that path where they are clearly the superior, and invalidate any other way of knowing or area of knowing that they're attempting to bring into the conversation. To keep it in that narrow way will often keep them from using other areas. A good example might be, like I said, science again. And science can perhaps sometimes be considered the most important of all areas of knowing, and yet if people are trying to put in ethics and that kind of thing into it, it seems to often be incompatible in those types of conversations. I just want to do science. I don't need to know necessarily what's right and wrong, but so that's obviously the kind of the conversation that's sometimes had, at least from what I've picked up with those conversations. All right, so, but you can make arguments either way with that. That'd be something to look into. However, questions now with simple answers, something kind of different than the narrowing, is something that's simple. So if you have a question, and a lot of my problems of knowledge that the students were constructing for their internal assessments, I will say, last semester, most of them went through a period of time where they had this, where it was, they didn't realize it until they had actually constructed this nice, seemed like it was nicely worded, but then I was able to kind of just say one word to it. I was like, yes, or no. And they didn't realize that they had constructed an entire question that had a very simple answer. Now, obviously, you have to explain yes or no, but it shouldn't be constructed in that way oftentimes when we do problems of knowledge. It shouldn't have a yes or no component to it. It should have some other type of broadness, which we will talk about. Things like to what extent tend to be the buzzwords of TOK. To what extent do now you can't say yes or no to that if you're saying the word to what extent. You're already putting in the caveat of lots of options, lots of chess pieces working together. Or lots of twittering machines like Paul. Who's this guy? Who's this artist?
I recognize
I was gonna say it and then I stopped it. Like the twittering machines of Paul Klee, he's putting these little guys together, winding them up and letting them spin off. That's his art. But anyways, problems of knowledge have three main characteristics. Ways of knowing is represented by asking about mechanisms by which we understand a position. So these are problems of knowledge. So if we're going to construct a problem of knowledge, we do it three ways. We have ways of knowing that are represented. So you want to make sure you have these different ways, which we haven't fully discussed or defined yet, but I'm just having you think about what do you think ways of knowing are. That is, I'm kind of giving you an extra definition here. Mechanisms by which we understand a position. How do we even begin to think about it? What's the filter we're using? Always trying to qualify, so this is what I've already hinted at. To what extent is a buzzword with that? To what extent is it justified, to use Esme's term there? Use qualifications to consider a range of answers. You don't want it to end with a yes or no. You want it to be able to be broad enough to consider lots of areas of knowing, but not so broad that you lose sight of your goal or wherever you're moving. Either areas of knowing or potential audiences are considered, so you want to know what you're trying to write it for. If you're writing a paper for me, there's going to be certain score elements there, because I'm going to be grading it, so that's like your internal assessment. If you're writing it for other graders, people outside here, you want to look at their rubric and their understanding of it. And of course, we'll go through all of this in turn. What are people expecting you to do? And what trains of thought from history of disciplines lead you to your conclusion. So you want to also consider that you're not the only person who has thought of these things. You're in fact only kind of discovering any little thing that you'll discover has already been discovered and is probably perhaps put in your way so that you discover it for the first time. It's kind of a humbling thing, because I think I'm even in that situation as well. I think we're all in that situation. There's always people who have brilliantly consider these things in much greater depth than I could even do. And I feel that with TOK all the time, guys, let me tell you. When I look at what Garrison's doing, or what Williams is doing, or whatever, and they spend their lives working on this. They've had experiences I've never, or chemistry. We have twice as many. 3 years, of course. Hold on, 3 years. Mr. Freer. If to think about their experiences in their life, it's like, what do I know? What do I know in these different areas? I try so hard, but I know that I'm just on the shallow sandbar, knowing that there's this huge pool and depth of it. I almost wish the multiverse were true so that I could skip around to other me's. Only tell myself to, go to school to be a science, go into the science field or go into the history field and just delve, be a completely different person. Do you ever feel that? I'm just I'm just trying to know who I am, not my infinite multiverse personas. Yep.
I'm just trying to confuse us.
Sorry. These are just the weird things that you think about. The problems of a TOK. Hashtag TOK problem.
Hashtag first world problem. There's too many questions.
There's too many questions. I have an acronym. I don't know.
Multi-world problem.
Yeah, multi-world problem. I don't know how applicable this is now. I constructed this last semester. I think it's a good way to describe it, but and I'll probably try and reference it more than I did last semester. Unfortunately, I didn't do enough of this Tao thing. Tao. You guys know what Tao is, right? Taoism. Tao Te Ching and Lao Tzu. Did you guys read that in English 10?
Oh yeah, we did only 112 though.
No, we were supposed
Okay.
Oh,
You're supposed to find one?
no, there's one in the book.
Okay.
The Taoism and it's about the sand.
I always think of Taoism as sort of a balancing of two things. Yeah, I always see that that cliche kind of person with the hat and the water jugs on either side of a stick, and they're walking across the bridge. I know. Yes.
I know.
Exactly. Well, I'm American, so everything I think of other cultures is cliche. I'm like, of course. Of France, it's like, again. You guys haven't taken, if you've taken art history, know I'm incredibly ethnocentric when I talk about art. No, but you're right, it is cliche. But Taoism kind of has that concept of balance, and I think as such, though, it kind of derives a good image for the idea of TOK, that there's a Tao in TOK, there's a balance of things, and yin yang of all things. So when I asked you to say what's the most important, that's just a good thought experiment, but perhaps it all kind of like Kabir models, perhaps it's a little bit more of an equaling type factor. But we're looking at the goals of TOK, each of these goals as being of similar worth. When we look at knowledge inquiry, that is questions, inquiring on things, I think types of knowledge inquiry is important, so to know the types and to identify the types. When I hear someone ask a question, I need to think about in my head the Tao of TOK. What type of question are they asking? Where is this going to fall? And from there, what moves can I make if they're in history or science or whatever? What does that look like? With the A of the Tao is application. So once I have identified the type of knowledge inquiry, how does this apply, or how am I going to apply it in my life or in the conversations that I have with people around me? And I think if we can't just stay in a static state, we have to move ourselves to change things and to be that kind of active participant. It's kind of the IB program's supposed to be anyways. You have some extra projects and things like creativity action service kind of stuff, right? Where you're trying to do things that are changing the world around, applying the knowledge inquiry. And lastly,